Vanguard!
You guys really enjoyed the previous tier list that we did on Chronojet Dragon, so I thought why not do a quick second one as a follow-up video to that tier list where we're gonna discuss Asha. And this is basically the same concept as the previous one, where it's in preparation for the next video that I'm gonna upload tomorrow, which is the deck spotlight for the new Asha deck and the new Dream Spinning Ranunculus Asha with the new VR as well as the trial deck. And just like the Chronojet one, we're gonna rank up all the old Asha cards, so this is the original Great Freeze, all the different versions, as well as different artworks, and the different Asha strides. But it's gonna be a much shorter video, because unlike Chronojet, Asha doesn't really have a Grade 0, Grade 1, or Grade 2 counterparts, and also the amount of strides are in less abundance than what we've seen with Gear Chronicle, as Asha didn't get a second archetype like that Gear Chronicle had with Time Leap, and then inwards with CTB. So without further ado, let's jump right into the tier list, and just like Chronojet, we're gonna do it in chronological order. So we're gonna start off with the original trial deck Grade 3 Asha, Ranunculus Flower Maiden Asha. And this card, this version, the original artwork is where everything started for the deck, but the skill itself wasn't super strong, and the artwork isn't also on the best side, because the later versions of Asha is gonna be will have much better artwork. And also keep in mind, the lower ranked Ashas are basically in comparison to the other Ashas. So a C tier or D tier Asha doesn't mean that the card in itself is C tier or D tier, but it's in comparison to the other Ashas themselves, because we cannot have everything in A tier and S tier. So the original trial deck Asha, I think I will put it in C tier here, because the artwork is pretty bland to what we would see in future cards themselves, and also the skill isn't the best skill as you could hope for, as the main problem of this Asha card and what the whole Bloom deck had for the longest of time was that against control clans, it wasn't really doing all right, because once they cleared the board and you go in your turn and you stride, your stride skill effectively did nothing because you have no rear guards, which means you cannot capitalize on your Bloom skill. So you basically were hoping that your opponent could not clear your board. So the skill wasn't all that great, and the artwork isn't also that great, but it was the founding card for the whole Asha Ranunculus deck as well as the Bloom deck, so it's definitely is gonna escape the D tier for now. Then this isn't the second card that was introduced, but it's a different artwork of the original Asha. And this, in my honest opinion, is going to be a D tier, because I was never really a fan of this artwork. The second trial decks, I believe this was trial deck 12 or 11, somewhere around that. We also got the ZTB trial deck for Chronojet and the new trial deck for Altmau. I wasn't really a fan of this artwork, never really was. I think even the older artwork is better than this one, because the proportions of Asha as the unit itself doesn't really it just doesn't really look right, where the old Asha is just it looks fine for what it is. Now the third artwork that we've got for Asha, and this was a secret pack Asha that came between the two trial decks, this one has to be S tier for me. I think this artwork looks amazing. Yes, the skill isn't really that great because it's the same skill as the original Asha, but the artwork on this one is sublime. It's such a good artwork, and probably if you had the money and you were playing Asha, you want to get four copies of this Asha in your deck. So yeah, that was a really good, nice addition for the secret pack. And also a lot of other secret cards in those secret packs got a nice reissue of a new artwork. Even the Altman in the secret pack looked amazing, as well as the Victor that was also really sought after for Nova Grappler players. So yeah, these artworks were pretty insane. Then from the trial deck Asha, we got the new Stride Fusion forms of Asha, and the first one that we've got is what we all know, because it's the new card that we also have in V-Series as a VR, that is Dream Spinning Ranunculus Asha. And this for me has to be I think a solid A tier, and what brings it to the A tier is mainly the art, because the skill isn't really that great either, because it's basically a skill that gives your front row plus 5k if you already have the correct field setup. Because yes, this card can superior call a unit, but you need to have GB2 to actually get that effect, because you need to have multiple cards in your G-Zone face up in order to get that effect itself. And that's really slow to get a +1 for a GB2 skill. That's really slow. So that's why the skill isn't all that great. But the artwork is insane. It's really good artwork. I think I even like this version of the artwork even better than I like the one that we've now got in the V series, if I'm gonna be very honest. Now the second stride form that we've got for Asha is Ranunculus Inglorious Bloom Asha, and this for me is definitely an S tier. The artwork is insane, but the skill was also really good. Where Dream Spinning was basically a good setup stride for your first ride, as you could get some power to the field, you could press your opponent a little bit, but it wasn't really good at finishing your opponent, and it wasn't really good in setting up your entire board. That is where this stride came into play, because this also has a GB2 skill, and once you're already straight into a Dream Spinning Asha, you could go into this thing and go ham, because this card allows you to superior call unit regardless, and then for every copy of Dream Spinning Asha face up in your G-Zone, you could give your entire board an immense power buff. And in the mid to late game, that could have been a gigantic power buff on top of your bloom skill. So if you already had the Katrina blooms, that meant your columns would easily hit over 100k if you had the correct setup. But later, with future support, when we get the back row attackers, then things would have become crazy, because then you could set up 5, maybe 6 attacks, which actually hit for 24, maybe even higher, which in the G era was pretty good, because that meant it could hit over 2 defensive triggers, which is actually pretty damn solid for something like Neo Nectar. So this card was really good. It made the Asha deck actually viable to some extent. It wasn't top tier, it was somewhat of a rogue tier, but if you could operate the deck to a certain degree, then this card was basically the main reason why the deck actually performed as good as it did back in the day. So yeah, artwork and skill, insane, and this was the reason why I really fell in love with the Asha deck back in the day when I actually played the Jira with different decks like Vanquisher, Neo Nectar, and of course Time Leaps. This was definitely a really good card. This was also the point where, as I explained, was starting to play Asha as an actual deck on a consistent basis. And the moment that I start enjoying the Asha deck, that's where we got the new versions of Asha, as so far we only have one grade 3 Asha. But the second Asha that they introduced in the Try Free Extra Booster set, where we also got the new form of Altmal, we also got introduced at the new Asha, which was Ranunculus of Searing Asha. And this card fixed a problem which the old Asha had, which I explained in this video, where if our opponent could retire a field, we couldn't really do anything. This card allows us to superior call a card at the end of our turn or at the end of our opponent's turn, so we could set up our copy card for once we stride with our stride skill. But there was a problem. This stride skill was really overcosted because it costs a counterblast and soul blast, which also was the fact with Inglorious Bloom, which also costs a counterblast and soul blast. So if you combine the two cards, it will cost you 2 counterblasts, 2 souls, which you couldn't sustain. Yes, this Asha had a GB2 Bloom skill, which could give you a counter charge and a soul charge, but you rarely used that skill because the issue is that it was a Vanguard Bloom skill, and you need to call a Asha, which wasn't really the ideal play in most scenarios, because if this was the card you called at the end of your opponent's turn, you actually want to call a grade 1 or grade 2 with an actual Bloom skill, which then give you an offensive play, but this Asha didn't really allow you to do that, so it was really awkward. But the artwork is god tier. It's such a great artwork, which in itself is an S tier. And the skill was really good, but it had some flaws to a certain degree, and I'm gonna put it in A tier for now because of the next Asha. I don't want to put this third version of Asha and Searing Asha in the same tier, because they are definitely separate to a degree for certain reasons. As the next Asha, which we would get a year later, was Ranunculus of Fantasmic Blue Asha, better known as Blue Asha. And this Asha is definitely S tier. The artwork is insane, but the skill is just insane, because as I explained with Searing Heart, which fixed the problem because we could call units at the end of our opponent's turn, so field retire and locking and stuff like that was less of an issue, but locking was still an issue to a certain degree, because if they locked their entire front row, then we couldn't really do anything. Well, this Asha removed all those problems, because this Asha could send locked cards and rear guards from the field back to the deck, as well as cards from the drop zone back to the deck, and then we can call units from our hand. This not only allows us to remove locked card, it also allowed us to fuel our deck with more bloom targets, because the problem with Neonectar was also that once we start copying, at a certain point, our copy targets are gone from our deck. So we run out of ammunition, we run out of steam. This Asha allowed us to put everything back on a really good pace. It also allows us to put a bloom card on the field, back to the deck, and immediately call it if we have a copy in our hand. Or we can use its stride skill, which was actually way cheaper than Searing Heart, and it searched out the bloom ability. So we actually don't have to have a copy on the field as long as the card has a bloom skill. We could superior call it with Blue Asha. And then also on top of that, it could potentially countercharge the Soul Charge. So it was not only cheaper, it gave us resources, and it's superior called whatever we want, basically. So yeah, this Blue Asha artwork was insane, but the skill was just insane for the Neonectar Asha deck at the time. And sadly, that's basically also the last card that we've got for the Asha archetype in the G era. With that said, we now enter into the V era, which gives us to the present day with the new Asha from this trial deck, as well as Dream Spinning Asha from the set. And interesting enough, we also got a brand new Asha in the likes of the token Asha, because that's still an official Asha card. But we got ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about the new Asha from the trial deck. We all know the skill is pretty interesting. It also is a good rearguard skill, which so far we didn't actually have a rearguard Asha ability, so that's already plus points. I also really like the artwork. I think this artwork looks way better than the original trial deck Asha, so for that itself, I think it's a solid B tier. The skill, in comparison to the other Asha cards, it just isn't as good, because the token is very reliant on certain things going right. The amount of pressure or consistency things you can do is on the lower side, and this is mainly a rearguard unit instead of an actual Vanguard unit, because if you write this thing, you're probably on the weaker side of what the deck actually can do if you play the complete VR deck. If you're budget, it's a whole different story. But the artwork definitely carries this card, because I think besides the secret rare artwork, this is probably the best normal Asha artwork we have seen so far. Now with that, we go to the Dream Spinning Ranunculus Asha from the VR series, and I think this is a solid A tier, because the artwork is pretty good, but it's, I think, not as good as the original the Dream Spinning Asha. But I think this skill is actually better than the original Dream Spinning Asha, as this card makes the token deck actually viable. It's really good, it gives you constant pressure, and it's a solid Vanguard unit, and it's actually much faster because it's a grade 3 instead of a stride form that we've seen with the original Dream Spinning Asha. The only thing that the Dream Spinning Asha has an advantage over this particular Asha right now is that it actually was carried thanks to Inglorious in Bloom Asha, because that was getting stronger the more copies of Dream Spinning you had face up in your G-Zone. But that said, as I explained in previous videos, I have a hunch that we might get another try-free support before we end the G reboot in this current V-Series era, before we go to the next big thing for Vanguard next year. And with that, there's a highly likely chance that Gear Groovy, Dream Spinning, Glorious in Bloom Asha, as well as the second form of Allball might actually be printed in the V-Series. And if that works with Dream Spinning, then that could also carry this card even further beyond. So for that, I think this Asha is a solid A tier. Now we get to the final card, and this is the brand new form of Asha. This is the Flower Fairy token, and I think this is just a solid S tier. I mean, it's super cute, it's adorable. I think nobody expected this type of card. We also seen really amazing custom artworks of people trying to make their own tokens with this card. We have seen older versions with plant tokens with the Blue Asha. We also now see this with a blue version of this card with Blue Asha. There are so many interesting custom artworks that people are making for the fan artworks, which look really great. But also, I'm really a fan of this mechanic because it's really interesting and unique. But they can take this mechanic to so much more lengths than just what we have right now. The potential is there. The concept right now is pretty interesting, and the artwork is just really cute and it's top tier. The only sad part is that it's in common. We don't really have an SP Voil or a Triple R Voil or something like that. But who knows, maybe they make a special promo where they actually do that, and we get some interesting, nice artwork for this card as well. And there you have it. That's basically the main tier list for Asha on my personal take. As you can see, just like Chronojet, it's pretty top heavy, but that's to be expected. Asha is an insane card with amazing artwork. There's a reason why so many people love Neo Nectar in the Jira. It hasn't really been competitively viable in much sense of the Jira, but it's always been a played deck because of Asha herself. The only downside of the lower bottom of the tier list are basically the trial decks, the original older artworks, as that's basically where the GR started, and that's when artworks were still starting to get better and better. But now I'm curious of what you guys think of these older cards for Asha. I leave a link to the tier list itself in the description down below, so you can do your own tier list. And just like the Chronojet one, I want you to tweet me at Mr. Timeleap your tier list so I can understand if I'm just completely full of shit and don't know what I'm talking about, because maybe you have a different opinion about your tier list of which Asha should be top and which Asha should be bottom. So I'm curious of what you guys can come up with your own tier list. And with that, we basically conclude this video. As I explained at the beginning of this video, it was basically a quick, easy to digest video, just a fun thing to do for now, because tomorrow we're gonna dive into the brand new deck spotlight for Dream Spinning Ranunculus Asha, which incidentally is also the last deck profile that we're gonna do, or deck spotlight for the next stage extra booster set, which in itself means that we're gonna start doing videos for the next big set, Silver Dust Blaze, very, very soon, but not before we go into the budget options, which I'm gonna do a little bit different than per usual, but I will explain that in the budget video itself. And I'm planning to do a very special new type of video about the next stage extra booster set before we're gonna dive into Silver Dust Blaze. And if you guys enjoyed that video, and I'm not gonna spoil things just yet, I might do that more on a consistent basis, but more on that in the future. As always, this video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply do that by going over to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Timeleap, and I see you guys in the next one.